I knew something was wrong the moment I saw Linda Patterson standing at the end of my gravel driveway with her hands on her hips, staring at my barn like it had personally offended her. The morning sun was barely up over the rolling hills of Sonoma County, California, and I was still on my first cup of coffee when I spotted her through my kitchen window. My name is Marcus Owens, and I had moved to this 10-acre property in rural Petaluma 6 months ago, thinking I had finally escaped the suffocating rules of suburban life. I was wrong. Linda was the president of the Meadowbrook Estates, HOA, a neighborhood association that technically only covered the small subdivision of cookie-cutter homes about a quarter-mile down the road from my property. My land sat at the edge of their jurisdiction, in what I thought was a gray area that kept me mostly free from their oversight. The developer had apparently annexed some of the surrounding agricultural land into the HOA boundaries years ago, hoping to eventually expand the subdivision. That expansion never happened, but the boundary lines remained, and so did Linda's belief that she had authority over everything within them. I set down my coffee mug and headed outside, my boots crunching on the gravel. 3 of my barn cats immediately emerged from various hiding spots, weaving between my legs as I walked. Tiger, a massive orange tabby, led the pack, followed by Smokey, a gray longhair and Patches, a calico who thought she owned the place. I had 7 cats total, all working animals who kept the mouse and rat population under control in my barn and equipment shed. They were essential for any rural property, especially one like mine where I stored grain for my 2 horses and had various outbuildings that attracted rodents. "Good morning, Linda," I called out, trying to keep my tone neutral. "What brings you out here so early?" She turned to face me, her perfectly styled blonde hair not moving an inch in the morning breeze. She was probably in her early 50s, always dressed like she was heading to a country club board meeting, even at 7 in the morning. Today, she wore white capris and a pink polo shirt with a designer logo I did not recognize. "Mr. Owens, we need to talk about your cat problem," she said, pointing at Tiger, who had stopped to groom himself in a patch of sunlight. "I have received multiple complaints from residents about the number of feral cats roaming around your property. It is unsanitary, dangerous, and frankly, it is bringing down property values in our community." I took a slow breath, counting to 3 in my head. "These are not feral cats, Linda. They are barn cats, working animals. Every farm and ranch in this county has them." "This is not a farm," she snapped. "This is a residential area governed by the Meadowbrook Estates HOA covenants, codes, and restrictions. And according to Section 7, Subsection 3, Paragraph B, residents are limited to 2 domestic pets per household. You clearly have more than 2 cats." I could not believe what I was hearing. "Linda, I grow hay on 5 acres of this property. I have 2 horses, chickens, and yes, barn cats to control pests. This is agricultural land. I am not part of your little subdivision." She pulled out a folder from her enormous designer handbag and thrust a map at me. "Your property is within the HOA boundaries, right here." She jabbed her manicured finger at a section of the map that did indeed include my land. "You purchased this property with full knowledge of the HOA restrictions. You signed the disclosure documents at closing." I had signed a mountain of paperwork when I bought the place. And yes, there had been something about the HOA boundaries, but my real estate agent had assured me it was a technicality that would not affect actual agricultural operations. The previous owner had kept cattle on this land for 20 years without any issues. "Linda, even if my property is technically within your boundaries, agricultural operations are protected under California state law. I am not running a suburban house here. This is a working property." Her expression hardened. "I do not care what you think state law says. HOA rules supersede individual preferences. You have until the end of the week to remove all but 2 of those cats, or you will face fines, starting at $500 per day per violation. You cannot be serious." "I am deadly serious, Mr. Owens. The HOA board met last night and we voted unanimously to take action. You will receive formal notice in the mail within 3 business days." She turned on her heel and marched back toward her white Mercedes SUV parked at the edge of my property. I stood there, watching her drive away, my coffee going cold in my hand. Patches rubbed against my leg, purring like a small motorboat. I reached down and scratched behind her ears, my mind already racing through my options. I was not getting rid of my cats. These animals served a vital purpose, and beyond that, they were under my care. I had taken responsibility for them, and I did not abandon my responsibilities. Back inside, I immediately got on my computer and started researching. I was a freelance software developer who worked from home, which meant I had the flexibility to dive deep into this problem. I spent the entire morning reading California agricultural codes, HOA law, and property rights statutes. What I found was interesting. California had strong protections for agricultural operations under the Right to Farm Act. The law specifically protected farmers and ranchers from nuisance lawsuits and local ordinances that tried to restrict normal farming activities. Barn cats, as I had suspected, fell under the category of agricultural animals when used for pest control on working agricultural land. The definition of agricultural land was surprisingly broad and included properties as small as 5 acres if they were actively used for farming, ranching, or other agricultural purposes. I made notes, copied relevant statute numbers, and started building my case. By lunchtime, I had a decent understanding of where I stood legally. My property qualified as agricultural land. My cats qualified as agricultural animals serving a legitimate purpose. The HOA covenants could not override state agricultural protections. But I also knew that knowing the law and fighting an HOA were 2 different things. HOAs had money, lawyers, and time. They could bury me in legal fees even if I was right. I needed to be smart about this. I called my neighbor, Frank Morrison, who owned a 30-acre ranch on the other side of the hill. Frank had been ranching in Sonoma County for 40 years and knew every quirk of local agricultural law. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Frank, it's Marcus. I have got HOA trouble." He laughed, a deep belly laugh that made me feel slightly better. "Let me guess. Linda Patterson showed up at your place this morning. How did you know?" "Because she tried the same thing with the Hendersons 2 years ago. They had goats. She said the goats were too noisy and smelled bad. Tried to fine them into getting rid of their herd. What happened? They fought her. Got a lawyer who specialized in agricultural law. Cost them about $5,000, but they won. The judge told Linda in no uncertain terms that she could not use HOA rules to shut down legitimate farming operations. She has been sore about it ever since." I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. "So there is precedent." "Absolutely." "Listen, I will text you the name of the lawyer the Hendersons used. Good guy, knows his stuff. But here is some free advice. Document everything. Take photos of your cats working, keep records of your hay production, anything that proves this is a real agricultural operation. The more evidence you have, the better." "Thanks, Frank. I really appreciate it." "No problem. And Marcus, do not let Linda bully you. She is used to people rolling over, but she is not above the law, no matter how much she thinks she is." I spent the afternoon taking Frank's advice. I photographed my cats in the barn, around the hay storage, near the chicken coop. I documented the rodent control problem that every agricultural property faced. I took pictures of my hay field, my horses, my chickens. I pulled up my property tax records, which classified my land as agricultural for tax purposes. I gathered 6 months of receipts for animal feed, hay production supplies, and veterinary care for my barn cats. By the time the sun was setting, I had compiled a thick folder of evidence proving that my property was a legitimate agricultural operation, and my cats were working animals, not pets. 3 days later, the certified letter arrived from the HOA. It was exactly as Linda had promised. A formal notice of violation, citing Section 7, subsection 3, paragraph B of the HOA covenants. I had 7 days to comply or face fines of $500 per day for each cat over the 2-pet limit. Since I had 7 cats, that meant they were claiming I had 5 violations, which would cost me $2,500 per day if I did not comply. The math was absurd. They wanted to fine me $75,000 per month for keeping barn cats on agricultural land. I called the lawyer Frank had recommended, a man named David Chen who practiced in Santa Rosa. His secretary scheduled me for a consultation the following morning. David's office was in a modest building near the courthouse. He was in his mid-40s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that I immediately appreciated. I laid out the entire situation, showed him my documentation, and gave him copies of the HOA notice. He reviewed everything carefully, making notes on a legal pad. After about 20 minutes, he looked up and nodded. "This is pretty straightforward, actually. You are clearly operating an agricultural property. Your land is zoned agricultural. You are paying agricultural property taxes, and you are engaged in hay production and livestock keeping. Your barn cats serve a legitimate agricultural purpose as pest control. Under California Food and Agricultural Code Section 54,022, your property is protected by right to farm provisions. So the HOA cannot force me to get rid of my cats. Not only can they not force you, but if they try to levy these fines, you can sue them for harassment and attorney's fees. The law is very clear on this. HOAs cannot use their covenants to shut down or restrict agricultural operations that were established in good faith. The fact that the previous owner ran cattle here for 20 years strengthens your case considerably." I felt relief wash over me. What do I do next? I will draft a response to their notice. We will cite the relevant agricultural codes and make it clear that any attempt to fine you will result in immediate legal action. We will also inform them that under California Civil Code Section 5975, if we have to sue them and win, they will be liable for your attorney fees. That usually gets their attention. How much will this cost me? For the initial response and consultation, about $1,500. If they back down, that is all you will pay. If they escalate and we have to go to court, it could run you $5,000 to $10,000, but based on precedent, we would almost certainly win and recover those costs from the HOA. It was a lot of money, but less than I would pay in even 1 month of their ridiculous fines. Let's do it. David drafted the response letter that afternoon. It was a masterpiece of legal writing, polite but firm, citing case law and statutory codes that completely demolished the HOA's position. He sent it via certified mail and email to Linda Patterson and the HOA board. I thought that might be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 days after David sent the letter, I came outside to find that someone had scattered rat poison around my barn. Not just a little bit, but a dangerous amount that could have killed my cats, my chickens, or even my horses if they had ingested it. I was furious and terrified. I immediately called the sheriff's department. Deputy Martinez arrived within 30 minutes. She was thorough and professional, taking photographs and samples of the poison. "Do you have any idea who might have done this?" she asked. "I have been in a dispute with the HOA president, Linda Patterson. She wants me to get rid of my cats and has been threatening me with fines. But I do not have proof she did this." "You have security cameras." I did not, which I immediately realized was a mistake. "No, but I am going to install some today." Deputy Martinez finished her report and gave me a case number. "I will include the information about your HOA dispute in my report. If anything else happens, call us immediately. Poisoning animals is a crime under California Penal Code 596. If we can identify who did this, they will face charges." As soon as she left, I drove to town and bought a complete security camera system. I spent the rest of the day installing cameras covering my driveway, barn, and the perimeter of my property. The cameras had night vision, motion detection, and connected to my phone so I would get alerts if anyone came onto my property. I also called David Chen and told him what had happened. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "This changes things. If the HOA or any of its members are engaging in criminal activity, we need to document everything. Keep that police report. Make sure those cameras are working. And be careful, Marcus. Some people get irrational when they do not get their way." That night, I barely slept. I kept checking the camera feeds on my phone, jumping at every motion alert that turned out to be a deer or one of my cats walking past a sensor. I hated feeling unsafe on my own property, in the place I had moved to specifically for peace and freedom. The next morning, Linda showed up again. This time, I had video of her entire visit. She got out of her Mercedes and walked straight to my front door, banging on it like she was the police. I opened it with my phone in hand, already recording. "What do you want, Linda? You think you are so clever, getting a lawyer involved." "The HOA board has consulted with our attorney, and he agrees with our position. You are in violation of the covenants, and we will pursue every legal remedy available to us, including poisoning my animals." Her face went pale. "What are you talking about?" "Someone scattered rat poison around my barn 2 days ago. I have filed a police report. If I find out it was you or anyone associated with the HOA, I will press charges." "I would never do such a thing. How dare you accuse me?" "I did not accuse you. I simply stated a fact. Someone poisoned my property, and the timing is awfully suspicious given your threats." She pointed her finger at me, her hand shaking with anger. "You are the one causing problems in this community. All we want is for you to follow the rules like everyone else." "I am following the rules, Linda. State law, agricultural codes, real rules that actually apply to my property, not your made-up HOA nonsense." "This is not over," she hissed, then turned and stormed back to her car. I immediately sent the video to David Chen. He called me back within an hour. "Marcus, I am going to be blunt with you. I think we should file for a temporary restraining order against Linda Patterson. Her behavior is escalating, and whether or not she was involved in the poisoning incident, she is clearly harassing you. We have enough documentation to show a pattern of harassment related to your legal agricultural operation. Will that make things worse? Possibly in the short term, but it will also create a legal record that protects you. And it will send a message to the HOA board that you are serious about defending your rights. Sometimes that is what it takes to get people to back off." I thought about it for maybe 10 seconds. "Do it." David filed for the restraining order that afternoon. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. In the meantime, I continued my normal routine, taking care of my animals and working on my software projects. My cat seemed unbothered by all the drama. Tiger caught a mouse and left it on my doorstep like a gift. Smokey spent hours lounging in the barn loft. Patches patrolled the chicken coop with the dedication of a security guard. They were doing exactly what barn cats were supposed to do, and I was not going to let anyone take them away. The night before the restraining order hearing, my motion sensors went off at 2 in the morning. I grabbed my phone and checked the cameras. 2 figures were walking up my driveway, both wearing dark hoodies. My heart hammered as I watched them approach my barn. I immediately called 911. Someone is trespassing on my property. I have them on camera. They are approaching my barn right now. The dispatcher kept me on the line while sending deputies. I watched the camera feeds, my stomach tight with anxiety. The 2 figures reached the barn and started trying to open the doors. My cats must have been inside because I could hear yowling through the phone. Then one of the figures pulled something out of a bag. "They have something," I told the dispatcher. "I do not know what it is." Red and blue lights suddenly flooded my driveway. The 2 figures ran, but deputies were already coming around both sides of my property. I watched through the cameras as both trespassers were tackled and handcuffed within 30 seconds. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I got dressed and went outside. Deputy Martinez was there again, along with 3 other deputies. The 2 trespassers were sitting on the ground in handcuffs. As I got closer, I recognized one of them. It was Brad Patterson, Linda's son. I had seen him around the neighborhood, a guy in his late 20s who still lived with his mother. The other guy I did not recognize, probably one of Brad's friends. Deputy Martinez saw the recognition on my face. "You know one of them. That is Brad Patterson. His mother is the HOA president who has been harassing me about my cats." She nodded slowly. "We found these in their possession." She showed me a bag containing what looked like animal traps, more rat poison, and a can of spray paint. "I think we interrupted them before they could do whatever they were planning." "I want to press charges," I said firmly, "for trespassing, attempted animal cruelty, and anything else that applies. You have got it. We have got everything on your security footage plus the physical evidence. These 2 are going to have a very long night." Brad was glaring at me from the ground. "My mom is going to sue you for everything you have got," he said. "Your mom is the one who is about to have serious problems," I replied. "Congratulations on committing crimes on camera." The deputies loaded Brad and his friend into separate patrol cars. Deputy Martinez took my statement and made copies of the security footage. By the time the sun came up, I had given a complete report and had documentation of everything that had happened. David Chen was ecstatic when I called him with the news. "This is perfect. Not perfect that they tried to hurt your animals, but perfect for our case. We are going to amend our restraining order request to include Brad Patterson, and we are going to present this evidence at the hearing. The judge needs to see what you are dealing with." The hearing was at 10 o'clock the next morning. I wore a suit, which felt strange after months of wearing jeans and work boots every day. David met me outside the courtroom, and we reviewed our strategy one more time. Linda Patterson showed up with her own lawyer, a slick-looking guy in an expensive suit who clearly specialized in HOA cases. She looked rattled when she saw me, and I wondered if she knew yet that her son had been arrested on my property the night before. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Judge Helen Morrison. She had a reputation for being fair but no nonsense, according to David. We were called into the courtroom and everyone took their seats. Judge Morrison reviewed the petition. "Mr. Chen, you are requesting a temporary restraining order on behalf of your client, Marcus Owens, against Linda Patterson. Please present your case." David stood and laid out the entire timeline. the initial confrontation about my cats, the HOA violation notice threatening absurd fines, the poisoning incident, Linda's continued harassment despite my attorney's response letter, and finally, the attempted break-in by her son the previous night. He presented copies of the police reports, the security camera footage, and all of our documentation about my property's agricultural status. It was a comprehensive demolition of Linda's position. When he finished, Judge Morrison turned to Linda's attorney. "Counselor, do you have a response?" The lawyer stood, looking less confident than when he had walked in. "Your Honor, my client was simply attempting to enforce the HOA covenants that all property owners in Meadowbrook Estates agreed to follow. She had no knowledge of any criminal activity and cannot be held responsible for the actions of her adult son." "I am not asking about her son yet," Judge Morrison said. "I am asking about her actions. Did your client threaten Mr. Owens with fines of $2,500 per day for keeping barn cats on agricultural property? The property is within HOA boundaries, Your Honor." "That was not my question. Did she threaten those fines?" The lawyer hesitated. "Yes, Your Honor, but she was acting within her authority as HOA president." Judge Morrison looked at Linda directly. "Miss Patterson, are you aware that California Food and Agricultural Code Section 54022 protects agricultural operations from exactly this kind of interference?" Linda lifted her chin. "I am aware that HOA covenants are legally binding contracts, Your Honor." "They are contracts that cannot violate state law," Judge Morrison said sharply. "Mr. Owens has clearly documented that his property is actively used for agricultural purposes. His barn cats serve a legitimate agricultural function. Your HOA covenants do not give you the authority to shut down his farming operation, any more than you could tell a winery to stop making wine or a cattle ranch to get rid of their cows." "But Your Honor," Linda protested, "he has 7 cats. That is excessive." "For a suburban home, perhaps. For a 10-acre agricultural property with livestock, hay storage, and multiple outbuildings, that is completely normal. Have you ever been on a working farm, Miss Patterson?" Linda did not answer. Judge Morrison continued. "I am granting the temporary restraining order. Miss Patterson, you are to stay at least 100 yards away from Mr. Owens and his property. You are to cease all communications with him except through your attorneys. You are to withdraw the HOA violation notice and any associated fines. And you are to make it clear to the HOA board that Mr. Owens' agricultural operation is protected by state law and is not subject to your pet restrictions." "Your Honor, I must object," Linda's lawyer started. "Your objection is noted and overruled. Furthermore, I am going to make this very clear for everyone in this courtroom. If I see any more evidence of harassment, trespassing, or interference with Mr. Owens' legal agricultural activities, I will hold Miss Patterson and the entire HOA board in contempt. Am I making myself understood?" "Yes, Your Honor," David said. Linda's lawyer nodded reluctantly. "Yes, Your Honor." Linda herself just stared at the judge with barely concealed fury. "Now, let's talk about the incident 2 nights ago," Judge Morrison said. "Mr. Chen has presented evidence that Miss Patterson's son, Brad Patterson, was arrested for trespassing on Mr. Owens' property with apparent intent to harm his animals." "Miss Patterson, what do you know about that?" "Nothing, Your Honor. I had no idea what my son was planning." "Did you discuss your dispute with Mr. Owens in your son's presence?" Linda hesitated. "We may have discussed it at home. He lives with me." "So your son knew you were in conflict with Mr. Owens over his barn cats, and then your son showed up in the middle of the night with rat poison and animal traps. You see how that looks, do you not? I did not tell him to do anything." "I believe you," Judge Morrison said, though her tone suggested she was not entirely certain. "But this situation has escalated beyond a simple HOA dispute. Your son will face criminal charges for his actions. And you need to accept that Mr. Owens has every legal right to operate his agricultural property as he sees fit, within the bounds of state and local law. Your HOA does not get to override California agricultural codes because you do not like barn cats." The hearing wrapped up shortly after that. The restraining order was official. Linda had to stay away from me and my property. The HOA violation notice was withdrawn. I had won. Outside the courthouse, David shook my hand. That went better than I expected. Judge Morrison did not leave any room for ambiguity. What happens now with Brad Patterson? He will be arraigned on criminal charges. Probably get offered a plea deal since this is likely his first offense. But he will have a criminal record, and his mother will have to live with the fact that her harassment campaign led to her son committing crimes. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in weeks. When I got back to my property, all 7 of my cats were lounging around the barn in the afternoon sun, completely unaware that they had been at the center of a legal battle. Tiger came over for pets, and I sat down on a hay bale, scratching behind his ears. "You guys are safe," I told him. "Nobody is taking you anywhere." I thought that might really be the end of it this time, and for a while it was. Over the next month, things were quiet. Linda stayed away from my property. The HOA board sent me a formal letter through their attorney, acknowledging that my agricultural operations were exempt from certain covenants. Brad Patterson pleaded guilty to criminal trespassing and attempted animal cruelty, receiving 2 years of probation and a hefty fine. The story made the local newspaper, and I got several calls from other rural property owners in the area who had dealt with similar HOA conflicts. My hay field produced a decent first cutting. My horses were healthy. My chickens laid eggs like clockwork. And my barn cats continued doing their job, keeping the rodent population under control. Life was good. Then I got a call from Frank Morrison, my rancher neighbor. "Marcus, I thought you should know. Linda Patterson is trying to recall the HOA board and get special authority to hire an outside management company. Word is she is looking for ways to challenge the judge's ruling." "Can she do that?" "Technically, an HOA board can hire management companies. But if she is looking to restart her fight with you, that could mean more trouble. Just wanted to give you a heads up." I thanked Frank and called David Chen. He was not surprised. "Some people cannot let things go," he said. "Keep documenting everything. If she violates the restraining order or the HOA tries to levy fines against you again, we will take them back to court." At this point, with the judge's ruling on record, any further harassment could result in serious sanctions against the HOA, including personal liability for board members. Would they really risk that? You would be amazed what people risk when they are convinced they are right, even when they are clearly wrong. I kept going about my business but stayed alert. I checked my security cameras regularly. I kept my documentation up to date. I made sure to photograph and record all of my agricultural activities. If Linda wanted round 2, I was going to be ready. 2 weeks later, I got another certified letter. This time it was not from Linda, but from Meadowbrook Property Management LLC, a company I had never heard of. The letter informed me that the HOA had hired them to handle covenant enforcement, and they were conducting a comprehensive review of all properties within HOA boundaries. They requested permission to inspect my property within the next 10 days. I immediately forwarded the letter to David. He called me back within an hour. "Do not let them on your property. You are under no obligation to allow an HOA inspection of a working agricultural operation. This is clearly an attempt to find something, anything, they can use against you. I will draft a response declining their inspection request. Can they force an inspection? Not of your private property, no. If you were part of a housing subdivision where homes shared common walls or common areas, maybe. But you have a detached single-family property on 10 acres of agricultural land. They have no right to enter your property without your permission. David sent the response letter, and I figured that would be the end of it. But a week later, I was working in my barn when I heard a vehicle coming up my driveway. I walked outside to find a white pickup truck with Meadowbrook Property Management on the door. A man in his 50s got out, carrying a clipboard. "Can I help you?" I called out. "I am here for the property inspection," he said, not looking up from his clipboard. "I declined the inspection in writing. You are trespassing." He looked up annoyed. "Sir, as an HOA property, we have the right to conduct reasonable inspections." "No, you do not. This is agricultural property, and you were told in writing that I do not consent to an inspection. You need to leave. Now." "I am just doing my job." I pulled out my phone and started recording. "I am telling you for the second time that you are trespassing. I do not consent to you being on my property. Leave immediately or I will call the sheriff." He stared at me for a long moment, clearly trying to decide if I was bluffing. I was not. I pulled up the phone app and started to dial 911. "Fine," he said, holding up his hands. "But you are going to be reported to the board for non-compliance. You do that. Now get off my property." He got back in his truck and left. I immediately sent the video to David Chen. This time, David was angry. They are violating the judge's order. The restraining order specifically said the HOA was to cease all harassment and interference with your agricultural operation. I am filing a motion for contempt. This has to stop. The contempt hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. In the meantime, David filed additional motions seeking sanctions against the HOA and personal liability for Linda Patterson as the board president. The legal fees were adding up, but David was confident we would recover them. The night before the contempt hearing, I was up late working on a software project when my phone buzzed with a motion alert from my security cameras. I checked the feed and felt my blood run cold. Fire. The camera covering my barn showed orange flames flickering near the back wall. I dropped my phone and ran outside, already dialing 911 as I sprinted across the yard. "Fire at 2847 Petaluma Hill Road," I shouted into the phone. "My barn is on fire." The fire was still small when I reached it, concentrated on a pile of what looked like rags soaked in something flammable. I grabbed the fire extinguisher I kept mounted outside the barn door and emptied it on the flames. The fire died down, but I could smell gasoline. This was arson. Fire trucks arrived within 10 minutes, followed closely by sheriff's deputies. The firefighters made sure the fire was completely out and checked for any hot spots. Deputy Martinez was there again, and she looked grim as she surveyed the scene. "Third incident at your property, all related to your HOA dispute," she said. "This is beyond harassment now. This is attempted arson. That is a felony." "My security cameras caught everything," I said, my hands still shaking from adrenaline. "Let me pull up the footage." We went to my house, and I loaded the security footage on my computer. The cameras had captured everything in clear night vision. A figure in dark clothes had walked up my driveway at 11:30, carrying what looked like a gas can. They had poured gasoline on a pile of rags near the barn wall, lit it with what appeared to be a lighter, and then run back down the driveway. The quality was good enough to see details, but the person's face was mostly hidden by a hoodie. However, as they ran away, the hoodie shifted, and there was a clear shot of their face for about 2 seconds. "Can you zoom in on that?" Deputy Martinez asked. I zoomed in and enhanced the image as much as I could. The face became clearer. It was Linda Patterson. Deputy Martinez leaned closer to the screen. "Are you certain that is Linda Patterson?" "Absolutely certain. That is her." She pulled out her radio. "I need backup at 2847 Petaluma Hill Road. We have identified a suspect in an arson case. Linda Patterson, 4523 Meadowbrook Lane. We need units at that address for arrest." Everything moved quickly after that. Deputy Martinez secured the video evidence. Crime scene investigators arrived to document everything and collect samples of the accelerant. I gave another statement, this one much more serious than the previous ones. Within 2 hours, I got a call from Deputy Martinez. "We arrested Linda Patterson at her home. She is being booked on felony arson, felony attempted arson, and several other charges. She will be arraigned tomorrow morning." Given the seriousness of the charges and the evidence, I expect she will be held on significant bail. I could barely process it. Linda had actually tried to burn down my barn. She could have killed my animals, destroyed my property, and if the fire had spread, possibly burned down my house as well. Over barn cats, I called David Chen even though it was past midnight. He answered on the second ring, sounding awake. "Marcus, what happened?" I explained everything. The arson attempt, the security footage, Linda's arrest. David was quiet for a moment. "This changes everything. With felony charges against her, the contempt hearing will be moot. But you need to file a civil lawsuit against both Linda personally and the HOA. They are clearly liable for her actions given that she was acting as HOA president, and this was directly related to her HOA duties. We can sue for property damage, emotional distress, legal fees, and punitive damages. How much are we talking about? Potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars. Arson is serious. A jury will not be sympathetic to someone who tried to burn down a barn full of animals because of an HOA dispute. And California law allows for significant punitive damages in cases of intentional misconduct. I did not care about the money as much as I cared about making sure Linda could never do this to anyone else. Let's do it. The next morning, Linda was arraigned on 5 felony counts: arson, attempted arson, animal cruelty, trespassing, and criminal harassment. The judge set her bail at $250,000. According to the news reports, her husband had to mortgage their house to make bail. The story exploded in the local media. HOA president arrested for arson in barn cat dispute was the headline in the Petaluma Argus-Courier. It got picked up by Bay Area news stations and eventually went viral on social media. I started getting interview requests from everywhere, including national news outlets. David advised me to do a few carefully selected interviews to tell my side of the story. I did an interview with a local reporter who had been following the case from the beginning, and I did one with a national agricultural magazine that wanted to cover the right to farm angle. In both interviews, I emphasized that this was about protecting agricultural operations from overreaching HOAs, not just about barn cats. The support I received was overwhelming. Other farmers and ranchers reached out to share their own HOA horror stories. Rural property owners thanked me for fighting back. Even some people in suburban HOAs contacted me to say they were disgusted by Linda's behavior and were working to reform their own associations. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove Linda as president. They also voted to formally exempt all agricultural properties from pet-related covenants and to adopt new policies acknowledging California's right to farm protections. It was too little, too late for my purposes, but at least it might help future property owners. David filed the civil lawsuit 3 weeks later. We sued Linda personally for $1 million and the HOA for $500,000, citing their role in enabling and encouraging her harassment campaign. The lawsuit detailed every incident from the initial confrontation through the arson attempt, painting a picture of escalating violence driven by an HOA president who believed she was above the law. Linda's criminal case moved forward through the court system. Her attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the district attorney's office was not interested in going easy on her. Attempted arson was a serious crime, and the fact that she had done it because of an HOA dispute made it worse, not better. The criminal trial took place 6 months after her arrest. I testified about the entire timeline of harassment and showed the jury the security camera footage of Linda setting the fire. The video was damning. You could clearly see her face, see her pour the gasoline, see her light the fire and run away. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before finding her guilty on all counts. At sentencing, the judge was harsh. Miss Patterson, you held a position of authority in your community as HOA president. Instead of using that position to serve your neighbors, you used it to harass a property owner engaged in legal agricultural activities. When he defended his rights in court, you escalated to criminal behavior, culminating in an arson attempt that could have resulted in serious property damage, animal deaths, or even human casualties. This court takes these crimes very seriously. Linda was sentenced to 4 years in state prison, with credit for time served. She would be eligible for parole after serving half her sentence, but she would have a felony record for the rest of her life. Her husband divorced her before she started her prison sentence. Her son, Brad, already on probation for his own criminal trespassing conviction, cut off contact with her. The woman who had been so concerned about property values and community standards had destroyed her own life over barn cats. The civil case was settled out of court. Linda's insurance company paid $300,000, and the HOA's insurance paid another $400,000. After legal fees and expenses, I netted about $500,000. It was more money than I had ever had at one time, and I immediately put most of it into an account for property improvements and legal defense in case I ever faced HOA problems again. More importantly, I established a legal precedent that was useful for other rural property owners dealing with aggressive HOAs. David Chen published several articles about the case in agricultural law journals, and other attorneys started citing our case when defending farmers and ranchers from similar HOA overreach. Life eventually returned to normal on my property. My barn cats continued their work, completely oblivious to the legal and criminal drama they had caused. Tiger got older and slower but still patrolled his territory every day. Smokey had a litter of kittens in the hay loft, which I found homes for with other local farmers. Patches remained the undisputed queen of the chicken coop. I upgraded my security system, reinforced my barn, and installed a sprinkler system as a fire precaution. I expanded my hay production and bought 2 more horses. I even got a couple of goats, partly because I wanted them and partly because I could. Frank Morrison came over for dinner one night, about a year after everything had settled. We sat on my porch watching the sun set over the hills, drinking beer and talking about nothing in particular. "You know," Frank said, "you could have just moved, sold the place and found somewhere without HOA drama." "I thought about it," I admitted, "but this is my land. I worked hard to buy it." I should not have to run away because some HOA president could not handle the fact that rural properties have barn cats. You are right about that, and I am glad you fought it. Linda Patterson needed to learn that she could not bully everyone into submission. I think she learned that lesson the hard way. Frank raised his beer. To barn cats and agricultural freedom. I clinked my bottle against his. To barn cats and agricultural freedom. As the sun disappeared below the horizon and my cats emerged from the barn to begin their nightly patrol, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Complete peace. This was my home, my land, my life. And nobody was going to take it away from me over something as natural and necessary as barn cats doing their job. The legal battle had been exhausting and expensive, but it had been worth it. Not just for me, but for every other farmer, rancher, and rural property owner who might face similar harassment in the future. The law protected agricultural operations for good reasons, and those protections meant something. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA still existed, but under new management and with significantly reformed policies. They left me alone, and I occasionally saw their new president, a reasonable woman named Grace, who had voted against Linda's harassment campaign from the beginning. She waved when she drove past my property, and I waved back. That was the extent of our interaction, which was exactly how I liked it. I thought about Linda sometimes, sitting in prison, probably still convinced she had been in the right. Some people never learned. They were so invested in control and rules that they lost sight of common sense and basic decency. Linda had destroyed her life, her family, and her reputation because she could not accept that her HOA authority had limits. Meanwhile, my 7 barn cats continued doing what barn cats had done for thousands of years, hunting rodents, protecting stored grain and feed, and earning their keep on agricultural land. They were not pets, though I certainly cared about them. They were working animals, partners in running a successful small farm. The law recognized that distinction, even if Linda Patterson never had. As winter approached and I prepared my property for the rainy season, I reflected on everything I had learned. I learned that standing up for your rights was hard but necessary. I learned that documentation was crucial when dealing with any kind of legal dispute. I learned that agricultural protections existed for important reasons, and that rural property owners needed to know their rights. Most importantly, I learned that my quiet life on 10 acres in Sonoma County, surrounded by hay fields and horses and barn cats, was worth fighting for. This was not just property. It was home. It was where I belonged. Tiger rubbed against my leg as I closed up the barn for the night. I scratched behind his ears, grateful for his simple, uncomplicated existence. He did not care about HOA covenants or legal precedents. He cared about hunting mice, sleeping in sunny spots, and getting an occasional scratch from me. "Good boy," I told him. "You and your friends earned your keep today, just like every day." He purred and wandered off into the darkness, beginning another night of patrol. I watched him go, then headed back to my house, checking the security cameras one more time out of habit. Everything was quiet. Everything was safe. And 7 barn cats continued their timeless work under the stars, protected by agricultural codes that predated the HOA and would long outlast it. That was exactly how it should be.